sharing your time with us, and it's good to see many of familiar names and faces in the gallery. My name is Milan Nič. I'm the head of the Robert Bosch Center for Central and Eastern Europe and Russia at the German Council on Foreign Relations, also known as DGAP. And this is a part of our weekly series of web discussions on our target regions. And in the next 60 minutes, we will be talking about Central Europe, or the 4 Visegrad countries, how they are coping with the pandemic so far. We will discuss China's charm offensive in the region and expectations in the V4 capitals from tomorrow's European Council summit. It is my honor to introduce our distinguished speakers. Jana Kobzova is a chief foreign policy expert in the office of the Slovak president, Zuzana Čaputová. Welcome, Jana.
Hello.
Martin L. is the chief analyst at the Czech economic daily Hospodářske noviny.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello, Martin. And last but not least, my two colleagues, András Rácz and Traczyk.
Good afternoon. Hi.
Hi, András. András is in Budapest, and Adam here in Berlin. With this, over to Marina Sonceva for some housekeeping items and technology-related information, including a plea to mute your microphones.
Hi, also from me, I would like to introduce some technical rules, how we will navigate through our online discussion today. First of all, please have all your mics muted. I have already put you all on mute. To unmute yourself, please use this microphone button on your screen. And you may also want to switch between the speaker view and the gallery view in the right upper corner of your screen. Use the speaker view if you want to see the person who is speaking, or gallery view if you want to see all the participants on the screen. We recommend to use the speaker view during the panel discussion. At this point, I'd like also to notify you that this discussion is being recorded and thus is on the record, as we would like to provide it afterwards for those who could not join us now. And now we are coming back to Milan.
So let's start with a slide that we have showing a stark difference in infection rate between countries of Western Europe and Central and Eastern Europe. And here's the slide. It provoked quite a discussion at Twitter this morning when Branko Milanovic, well-known sociologist, sort of circulated it or posted it. And my first question is, how do you explain this stark difference in infection rate? Very briefly, please. Starting with Jana, maybe.
Sure. Of course, I'm not a sociologist or a doctor, but my very simple assumption, and this is what the government is working on, as well as their main baseline, is that we have not reached the peak of the pandemics in this region. And as you can see, this all concerns geographic locations apart from Austria. So my simple
You are
answer,
saying that the Central Eastern Europe is behind the Western Europe. It might still come. András?
It might still come. Yeah, we haven't reached the peak of the crisis. The government is not working on the assumption that we have reached it. We are approaching it.
András?
I share absolutely Jana's position. I mean, from the methodological perspective, it's anyways a bit tricky to argue about this graph because the pandemic is not yet over. So we are trying to compare moving targets. One thing is sure, the virus is more or less the same. So the reason is surely not that Western Europe would have a different virus. So probably, I mean, the most likely explanation, just as Jana said, I agree, Central and Eastern Europe has not yet reached the peak. Second, weather might also play a role, a bit warmer weather. Countermeasures might also play a role. Also, the BCG vaccination, quite common in this part of Europe, might also play the role. Again, we do not have a firm explanation yet.
Martin, over to you to Prague. Do you agree?
I agree. I would add only one thing, that all depends on the size of testing. if you test more, you get a much more precise result, and those countries are not testing so much in comparison with some other countries. So the reality might be totally different if you would have the same size of testing as, for example, Germany. I'm not speaking about the total number of testing, but about the relative size of testing to million of people. So we should have a second graph about how many tests per million people is done, and then you
exactly. And before we come to it, Adam, anything to add from the Polish perspective? If not, we can have the graph. So you can see here, if we zoom to the 4 Visegrad countries, and we are doing this video conference via Zoom, as a matter of fact, you can see that these are really relatively low numbers, but I would turn your attention to the number of conducted tests. This is a point that Martin just made. These are really low compared to countries like Germany, where I think we reached over 1 million tests. But at the same time, from the regional point of view, there are stark differences between countries. I can see that Hungary, with about the same number of same size of population, is testing at a much lower rate than the Czech Republic. Any comment on why is this?
From the government side, here the official narrative is that this is a conscious decision. The government is putting the emphasis not on the so-called preliminary testing, but the testing for the post-infection one. But besides that, there is also already an admitted shortage of tests, and the shortage of tests combined with the assessment that probably we are not yet at the peak, it also indicates that the government, to a certain extent, is also sparing and reserving the existing tests. So there is a number of factors behind. The capacity Hungary would have is actually around 6,000 tests per day. However, right now, Budapest is conducting approximately 2,500 tests per day, 2,200, so way below the capacity, which would be theoretically possible, which also suggests or supports the argument that the relatively low number of tests is not only a result of a shortage, but also of a conscious decision.
Which also points out to another paradox, that Hungary is a country which has the most strict measures. Also politically, it has allowed its government and its prime minister to rule by degrees, but yet it seems to be behind in the number of conducted tests. Do you think, András, that also means that the virus is not under control in Hungary?
This would be a very stark statement to make. And what we know for sure is that the government communication on the virus and on the data is very far from full transparency. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of question marks in the story, also in the virus-related data. To give you just one example, until last week, the expected peak of the pandemic was scheduled to take place sometime in June, July. There was no definite date given. However, a few days ago, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán declared that by the 3rd of May, Hungary would reach the peak. So the official peak date just came forward by more than a month. Mm-hmm. On what
Adam,
this data is based.
Adam, sorry to cut you there. András, Adam, if we can bring you in to discuss how it is in Poland. I think Prime Minister Morawiecki also informed or shared what epidemiologists told him recently, what is a projected peak date for Poland, and what is the date?
Well, there is no exact date. The date is somewhere between May and June, so we have no clear date where the peak should be, and I think nobody actually knows where the peak will be. So there is no kind of indication if we are moving very, very quickly towards the peak or not. But maybe just to add one point on the low numbers, we should also underline that early and decisive reaction was undertaken in all of these countries, including wearing masks in some of them, but also closing schools, cultural institutions, shopping malls very early. in comparison to the numbers we have seen in Western Europe. So this is, I think, a very important factor apart from the testing and all the other factors already mentioned.
Martin, it seems that Czech Republic is some step ahead of the other 4 countries in this region. It had conducted highest number of tests. It also introduced an exit strategy. Then it backtracked on it a little bit last week, but it is still moving forward with it. Can you elaborate on the numbers and the exit strategy?
I don't like to play with numbers because they are very relative, you know, at least at this stage. But I would say that the Czech government is doing something which is, let's say, unique in this region, maybe in Europe on the scale that starting from tomorrow, they are going to have a big survey of tests in a couple of regions, including Prague, which is the most affected region. Then the regions which were locked down for 2 weeks because of quick spread of virus in the beginning of March, and some other localities. So we will have at the beginning of May, the experts say, we will have quite a detailed picture about the real situation, about how many people went through that unconsciously, how many people are those asymptomatic cases who are spreading the virus without any symptoms of having the disease. So and this is kind of a cornerstone of our government future strategy. So but of course there is the political side of that. Huge quarrels about the closed borders, because the Czech Republic has closed borders for its citizens. They are the only EU country which said you are prohibited to travel abroad. So there is a big discussion around it. And the second discussion is now about the date, which is the April the 3rd as the date on which the emergency situation is supposed to end, which basically means that
April the 30th.
Yes, yes. And basically, it doesn't mean that everything will be normal, but it means that state couldn't buy, you know, directly the supplies, and the powers of certain politicians will be uncurtailed again. So it's.
We will. Thank you, Martin. We will discuss the issue of borders and also the impact on people who commute for work among these 4 countries, or from or to Austria in a minute. But I would like to bring in Jana to comment.
I think, as others have said, it's a combination of factors. I just want to add one thing and build up on what Adam said. These countries introduced the measures very early on. Slovakia closed its schools and basically affected social distancing at the time on the 12th of March when we had 21 confirmed cases. By that time, we basically had data from China, Italy, and a bit of Spain, and that was about it. And yet the government basically acted very preemptively and did that. And the point was very simple. We have seen that the main problem in Italy was not a mere number of infected, but the number of those who had to go to the hospital, and basically the system was overwhelmed. And the whole point of what we did in Slovakia, what the government did at the time, was to flatten the curve, not just to decrease the number of infected, but to spread them over time to buy us time. And that's why we have seen the curve growing slower, partly because of the restrictions, and partly that's what explains why we haven't reached the peak yet, because really, I mean, most people were very disciplined. Slovakia, just as Czech Republic, made wearing face masks mandatory. Schools are closed, most of the shops are closed. I mean, we can talk later about the exit strategy. We are in phase 1 of our exit strategy as of today, so it's very fresh. But really the point was flatten the curve, get ready, buy time. And now what we're seeing is a shift in strategy from these blanket bans to very concrete measures and targeted testings and isolating the epicenters of pandemics as they appear in Slovakia and across Slovakia.
Jana, and this is exactly another paradox. As we look at the data from all countries and we can compare them with Western Europe, these are really some of the lowest infection rates. The curve is growing not not very, it's a slow growth of infected on a daily basis. The threat rates are low, yet why are these governments reluctant to lift up containment measures?
Just a short comment from Slovakia, precisely because the advice from the epidemiologists is that if you release it now, we'll go back to where Italy was. It's too early, we haven't reached the peak, so the moment you release and relax everything at the same time, you'll get an uncontrolled spread of the virus. The point is not to freeze it completely, the point is to make sure that you can always localize the epicenters of the spread, isolate those people and treat them.
What are the risks, the most risky places or institutions except hospitals? Let's say in Czech Republic, where is the government focusing on it?
The Czech Republic is, and the government is focusing on the homes for elderly people. This is considered to be the most dangerous group, like 65 years old and plus. So there is now the main focus to isolate them from the, let's say, daily life. There are cases of care houses which are completely locked down voluntarily. That the carers there are they're voluntarily locked with the old people there, just not to spread the virus, because the Czech experience is that really it's not the disease itself which is killing, but disease itself is making much more complicated the other diseases. And now that we have a kind of a side effect, the doctors are starting to speak about that people are afraid to go to the hospitals with other diseases, and they are starting to die out with because of other complications which are not being treated because people are afraid. So this is kind of a new side effect with which the hospitals and the medical sector in general is starting to cope.
Martin, we'll stay with you on the question of borders. And there was a big debate in the Czech media about how strict the measures are on the outside borders of the Czech Republic with Germany, with Poland, and it also affects people who are coming from work to Czech Republic from Poland. What are the numbers and what is the time frame, if there is any, for relaxing these restrictions?
If I would know the time frame, I would be sitting in the central crisis committee in the government. The basic argument is that the Czech government at the beginning prohibited, not recommended, but prohibited Czech citizens to travel abroad in general. There were a few exceptions, like drivers of trucks, but simply it wasn't as a recommendation as in Slovakia or in Poland, but it was prohibition. So people, after those 4 or 5 weeks, started to realize that it's not so dangerous, that we somehow, I agree completely with Jana, what Jana said, that we started early to tackle the wave, to prepare the healthcare system for the possible upcoming wave of people who need healthcare. So now there is about 1 week very intensive discussion how to allow people move inside country and also outside country. So and
if you can please comment the case on the borders with Poland and cross-border work from Poland.
The Poland is not an issue in Czech Republic, the Polish border. The issue are Czechs working in Germany and Austria. Mm-hmm. This is the issue. The Poles coming, it's just about 50,000 Poles were working previously on this cross-border, but it's not an issue for the Czech government and Czech public. It will be issue when the factories will start to open because they will need this labor force, but it's not an issue in a Czech public debate.
Yeah, thank you. Adam, I asked about Poland because I wanted to bring Adam in. Poland is also quite strict in border closures, also vis-a-vis Germany, and there is a huge number of people that are so-called pendlers doing cross-border work in Germany, from Szczecin, from other areas. What is the update on this?
Yes, exactly. Well, this is a huge problem in Poland because what Poland did close its borders for foreigners. So foreigners are banned from entering the country. Poles are free to live and come back to Poland, but if they come back, they have to undergo a 2 weeks quarantine. So for the pendlers, as you said, it is a huge problem because they cannot cross border every day like they used to. And for example, when we take Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, which is exactly the region around Szczecin, on the numbers, you might say the number is pretty low because it's between 3,000 and 4,000, which were traveling, crossing the border on daily basis for work purposes. But when you count it up to 4,000 families, the number is becoming much much bigger right now. Also, it also affects seasonal workers who cannot move freely in this matter. So this might prove a bigger problem in the future as well.
Jana, how is it in my hometown of Bratislava, which is sitting at the border with Hungary and Austria, and there are also people, Slovaks living on the other side of the borders, or people working in Vienna, which is 60 kilometers away. How is this border issue sort of impacting daily life?
Well, it's becoming a hot political issue. It's not an issue of travel as such, but it's an issue for cross-border commuters. Slovakia, in terms of V4, has the highest number of cross-border commuters among the 4 countries. So we're talking about around 5% of the population, which is roughly 250,000 people. They mostly live in border areas of Austria and Hungary, and they commute to Bratislava for daily jobs. Basically, it's similar as in Poland. If you go abroad and you come back, you need to go into a 2 weeks quarantine, which of course is not practical if you're a daily commuter. The government proposed on Monday that they should be allowed to go about their work and jobs, but they have to prove that they're negative on COVID, which of course in Hungary costs around 70 euros. And if you're living in Rácz, which is a border town in Hungary, you need to go and have that test in Budapest. There is a special regime, but basically this is a short answer. It's becoming a deep problem. There is a petition online already petitioning the government to release and relax these measures because it's affecting, it's basically people who live in those areas or people who cannot afford to live in Bratislava. That's why they live abroad. But close enough to go and commute to work in Bratislava. And it's really affecting their living standards and it's affecting their everyday lives.
Now, this is a region with a regional format of regional cooperation, the Visegrad Group. It has not been working really that well in the last 6 weeks. Why? András, we haven't, let's bring you in. We haven't
so I got the easiest question. I'm very happy to get that. See, one of the core lessons of the Visegrad cooperation is that Visegrad is good and useful when the interests of the Visegrad countries are more or less matching. However, when it comes to closing down borders, or when it comes to the international competition going on for medical supplies and equipment, sorry, but this is a zero-sum game. Visegrad cooperation has never been good in zero-sum cooperation situation, zero-sum situations. So nothing that much special. Besides, the Visegrad Fund has not been designed either institutionally or conceptually or even resource-wise to counter or to react to pandemic situations. So
thank you. Martin L., do you think this will have a lasting impact on the Visegrad cooperation?
I would agree with András, and I would say that it can have a lasting impact because for such measures, you need some kind of institutional cooperation, and Visegrad cooperation is based on some kind of voluntary opt-in certain areas more, in certain areas less. And if you don't have any kind of instrument on which may be used by the governments to coordinate on, I don't know, closure of the borders or supplies, you see the lines of the trucks on the Slovak-Hungarian border, which are going a long way to Czech Republic, because then we see the practical impact on how different is the border control, for example, so I see that it will be like the Visegrad was always like a very low common denominator thing, and now this common denominator will be even lowest.
Yet to push you on this point and a little bit, these things, like on the EU level, are based on trust and overlap of interest. And on the EU level, these 4 countries are all of them in the cohesion camp, as the EU is debating measures how to finance recovery, or how to discuss again the 7-year EU budget. They might find themselves in the same camp, and on the prime minister's level, they might cooperate on EU issues quite well, starting from tomorrow. Do you, by the way, do you know if there will be a customary phone call between the 4 prime ministers ahead of the European Council tomorrow?
Me not, I don't know.
Jana?
I think there will be one.
Okay.
Has a little bit different position towards what we will see as an EU role in the crisis development. So,
but in terms of political trust, quite something is happening in Hungary with the empowerment law of the government and prime minister, which András is in place for 3 weeks, I guess.
Yes, more or less, yes.
There is a lot of criticism from the EU. European Parliament passed declaration criticizing Hungary and also Poland due to the plan to hold elections in May, presidential elections. What is how are these, from the point of view of democracy and rule of law and some kind of power grab actions by the ruling parties in Budapest and Hungary and Budapest and Warsaw, how are they reflected in Prague, let's say, Martin?
I think that our prime minister is long-term admirer of Mr. Orbán, so he would probably like to do the same, but he is restricted by the coalition partner and by the opposition and by the experts, and he's really afraid to lose popularity. So he's sometimes, not going into open, let's say, conflict with the general public opinion about certain things, or with media, because he now knows that the situation will be much worse in economic terms, and we will have elections next year. So he will.
So you are just saying that on the level of prime ministers, Visegrad will survive?
I think so. I think so. But the question will be, what will be the trust on the lower levels in terms of when I saw the border non-cooperation, then I was surprised that they were not able to call each other, to somehow coordinate at least the border closures, for example.
Jana, very briefly from your side, Slovakia is the only Eurozone country among the Visegrad 4, which probably has an impact on positions, and there is new government that will get a vote of confidence this week, right?
Yes, I mean, in the middle of all of that and pandemics, we had a slight challenge of having the government changed and power changed. So it's been very busy. I think the government is obviously taking the V4 as one of the possible frameworks, and given the geographical proximity, it's a format that will not be discarded. The dates for the summit of the V4 presidents has just been announced for October. So that format is not going to disappear, but of course, and you have seen it in the government's program for the next 4 years, the emphasis on V4 is on trying to continue the cooperation based on concrete interests, mutual interests that we share. And of course, there are areas where these countries do not have the same view or do not have the same interest. And of course, when it comes to the interests of Eurozone, Slovakia is quite a different case than the rest of the V4. Adam,
what is the update actually on the plans to hold presidential elections in the middle of pandemics in Poland as a postal vote in May?
Well, yes, according to the will of the government, the election should take place on May the 10th as an entirely postal election. The piece that postponing the election would hurt Andrzej Duda's chances for election, especially if recession kicks in, or when recession kicks in. However, the legal basis for this solution has not yet been adopted, which is very, very interesting and also very, very worrying, because the election is due to take place in less than 3 weeks. It has passed the Sejm, but it still has to go through the Senate and then come back to the Sejm for the final vote. So it's not 100% certain if it will come to force in the form that we expect it to be. So that is also why the government has already taken some steps on its own, which are, well, simply illegal. It has deprived the Independent State Election Commission of its powers and has already started to organize the election on its own without this proper legal basis. What
was the reaction to the European Parliament declaration from last week?
Well, it was rejected by the government, obviously, as always, as any voices of criticism coming from Brussels. But this is not something that would stop the government, because when of course, it was a resolution by the European Parliament, but the Commission was actually very quiet on this issue as far as we have seen. So this is not something that would stop the process going on. This is a power struggle. The laws no longer apply in many cases. So this is, well, this is politics in its purest form, I would say.
Very good. The clock is ticking, and before I open up for others to join us, let me quickly go through the big topic of China. So China is the source of a lot of medical supplies to many countries in Europe, not only in Central and Eastern Europe, but here it has a special political touch. One of the prime ministers was welcoming planes on the tarmac. I think the most amount, or the highest number of planes were coming to Hungary recently. András, is special relations and the Hungarian foreign policy towards the East playing a role in this? And is there any debate, as it can be in Hungarian media, about the supplies from China?
Well, special or close relations with China did not start, of course, by the coronavirus pandemic. This dates back a lot earlier. Since the coronavirus has hit Central Europe and hit Hungary as well, yes, you're right, Hungary is right now the largest importer of Chinese medical supplies, let it be masks, protective suits, rubber gloves, and a lot of things. Literally millions of masks are getting imported from China by Wizz Air flights, by other means. The question is, for which there is no answer, is the quality of these masks. Because many European countries has had problems with the quality of masks and medical equipment from China. This is something that Hungarian opposition is asking questions about, but the government is not commenting at all. Regarding the role in China in general, coronavirus pandemic brought another change. The Budapest-Belgrade railway line, which is a massive project, I mean a super large project, the price tag has increased significantly, practically doubled.
András, so, are these information about medical supplies from China made public?
Yes.
How many, who is getting them, who is a go-between?
Part of it is public. The numbers are public. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade is conducting a very transparent communication on the number of masks and medical equipment arriving. But there is no communication, no information about is the price. So
Jana,
what price, who is who buys them, what conditions, this we don't know.
Thank you. There was a discussion in Bratislava about the reliability of some tests from China for COVID, especially the quick ones based on blood tests. It seems that in Slovakia, these information are public. Is there anything that is withheld by the government related to supplies from China?
If it is, I wouldn't know, but just one thing I want to say about the Chinese deliveries. I think China invested quite well in its communication in the beginning of this crisis in Europe. And that has had a huge impact on public perception and opinion, at least in Slovakia. Some of you have seen the poll where 60% or 66% of those asked in Slovakia thought China was helping Slovakia to fight the corona crisis, which was 3 times less than what they thought the EU was helping. So in terms of perception, that was quite a quick win strategy, but that has really changed recently. There is not much of a discussion now about how much personal protective equipment we need. We've contracted a number of domestic providers and so on, but but that early victory has been scored, and it has been scored by China. Just a small footnote, most of it was purchased, it was not a gift, and actually the gift, the humanitarian assistance that Slovakia received from China was in value, in terms of euros, less than what Slovakia had sent to China in February as its humanitarian support when China needed the personal protective equipment.
Well,
so
that's quite funny for a country of 5 million people.
There you go. Yeah.
Martin, we'll end up this round with you, because in Prague there is a big political infighting between the government coalition parties, Social Democrats, and Mr. Babiš's party of who is and President Zeman, who is better friend with China and who can arrange what.
Well, I wouldn't say that the Prime Minister Babiš is trying to position himself as a friend of China. But I would say that at the beginning, it was a similar story as elsewhere, as just Jana just explained, that China was trying to portray itself as a savior. Now it's a much more critical view, at least from the point of media. I would say that it's a little bit, the relation to China is a little bit like elites versus society, that elites like president and some politicians are trying to portray themselves as friends of China. But now recently we've got some kind of really aid delivery of the equipment from Taiwan. So it's like kind of counterbalancing a little bit the picture of China in the Czech media. In general, in long-term polls, China is seen as one of the least friendlier nation or state. I think in general population, I think it's not changing so much, because there was a lot of critique about the quality of equipment we were purchasing. There were some reports about the prices or overpricing of that. And I cannot compete with András with exact numbers about who got more, because I was trying to find out, and I was told by colleagues who are investigative reporters that simply there is nobody knows how much for how much we've got from China in total. It's definitely, we are speaking about billions of crowns of deliveries. So question is, who made the business on that, and who got some influence over what? But
I think you all agree, or there's a question also to Adam, if you all agree that China is a big winner so far of these 2 months of COVID-19 in Central Eastern Europe in terms of aid deliveries or so-called mask diplomacy, in terms of how China is perceived in the public domain.
I would disagree in that, because they have overreached with the aggressive kind of a painting nice picture.
Mm-hmm. 30 seconds to Adam, to you about Poland.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I mean, China is a major supplier of medical equipment. So if any government who wants to demonstrate its effectiveness has to kind of fit or to bow a little bit to the Chinese narrative, to some extent at least. But you can also overdo it. And I think China did exactly that. And on the quality, maybe one short comment on the quality of the equipment, we actually don't know, because the Polish government decided not to test the equipment and send it directly to the hospitals. So we will know about the quality of the equipment maybe in a week or two, when it's actually used by the doctors and the servicemen.
Very good. Thank you for your patience. Over, Marina, to you to explain the rules in question and answer part.
Well, to ask the question or to make a comment live, please click raise your hand button and the chair will address you. If you are using a different Zoom version and raise the hand button is not working for you, just write a short message to the chat and we will put you on a speaker list. You may also write your questions and comments into the chat. You will find the chat button down your screen. However, we are encouraging you to ask your questions live, and please have your videos on while speaking, and do not forget to unmute yourself.
Very good. So I'm switching to a gallery view, and Marina, you might help me to see if there is a hands up or there is one question in the chat.
I see 2 hands up from Andrei Matisak and
Andrei, so please come in. unmute yourself.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Okay, you hear me?
Yes.
I think so, yeah. So
you can introduce yourself, please.
Yes, of course, yeah. András Matišák, Slovakia. I'm journalist from Devi Pravda. And hello to people I know, and good to see you. And hello to people I don't know, and also good to see you. One thing about the role of Slovakia, and of course maybe a question for Janka, but I would like to also maybe hear from the other people from the V4, because I wouldn't probably exaggerate the disagreement or disunity within the V4 regarding pandemics, because we see disunity everywhere, to be honest. Denmark closed the bridge to Sweden and so on. So borders and stuff, I don't think it's that important. It would be important. It would be great if we would be able to coordinate things, but nobody is doing it. Let's be honest. But one maybe specific questions regarding the next phase, and hopefully there will be some kind of recovery. And as Milan, you mentioned, Slovakia has a special position because we are in the Eurozone. So what kind of role does Slovakia maybe should play here? Because we have been, for ages, we have been on the side of Germany, so austerity and very strict financial measures. It seems that this government is not, it's not very open what we want to do. I think that we are just waiting for the decision, at least it seems. So maybe how do you see the role of Slovakia in all of it? And for the others from the V4, do you think that Slovakia can play also some role for the others? Because in the Eurozone, we are in the core. And sorry, guys, we are talking about money, and you will have to wait. What's next? Thanks.
Very good. Before we go to others, Janka, if I may add to this question also the European summit tomorrow, what is the new government of Igor Matovic saying? How is it positioning on some of the rescue mechanisms that are on the table?
Sure, I'm just going to be commenting on what's public, because of course the president doesn't work directly on the EU on an everyday basis. She doesn't take part in the European summits. I think the acknowledgement is that this is a different type of crisis than the 2008-2011 that we have seen. And as a result, the difference, we cannot make the difference about how we're going to help the countries based on how responsible their public finances was, which was of course obviously one of the splitting points back in 2011. The position is basically this, and it depends on how steep you think the fall and the recovery is going to be. If you are an optimist, you think this is going to be a very V-shaped, so we need to inject lots of money now and we're going to grow out very quickly. But of course, many others would argue this is a long-term problem, it will not go away. Therefore, the position as I would see it is it has to be rapid, it has to be bold. I think what everyone is looking at is behind what's been put on table in terms of European Central Bank's response, the insurance scheme. The big question is going to be how the European Recovery Fund is going to be funded. That's first. And second, are we talking about loans or are we talking about grants? And of course, given that Slovakia is a net recipient, you can only assume that the position of the government would be the more grants that are included, the better. Milan, I would say
yes, go ahead, just to close.
I would just add one thing. I mean, the fact that Slovakia is in Eurozone, of course, means that we do have a different kind of interest, but I wouldn't dismiss the MFF, because whatever is offered to the Eurozone countries, those who are not in Eurozone will demand to be reflected in the next multi-financial network framework. So it's not a complete zero. It is actually something that, you know, whatever you give to the Eurozone and whatever the Eurozone agrees on will have to be reflected in terms of how much the other countries will get in the next EU budget.
I see a raised hand from Szabolcs Pani. Szabolcs, if you can introduce yourself.
Yes.
Switch video if you want.
Sure. Can you see me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Just a quick question. So how do you think this Chinese mass diplomacy will affect the Huawei's and ZTE's participation, the Chinese vendors' participation in 5G frequency tenders and their ability to to participate as vendors for mobile carriers in the future. Do you think that it will have an outsized effect? Do you think it's a game changer, or it will just be a minor addition to the ongoing debate? Thank you.
There is another question from Richarda Lindau, sorry, Richarda, in the group chat. Richarda, do you want to ask the question by yourself, via video? Please go ahead and unmute yourself. You're still muted. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. So please introduce yourself and pose your question.
Hello to everyone. I was actually a former student assistant at the DGAP, and now we're actually also working on some statements from the Visegrad countries in Polis 180, where I'm volunteering. So I'm following the debate very closely. And my question is, I've seen that the only statement so far from the Visegrad group was on the Eastern Partnership, which was anyway scheduled ahead of the Eastern Partnership Summit. So they just quickly added this few phrases about helping the Eastern Partnership countries. So how serious is actually the offered help, the allocation of the funds, but especially this practical assistance concerning medical personnel?
To the countries of the Eastern Partnership?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Martin, let's start with you. You are muted, yes.
I'm afraid that the Eastern Partnership is now, from the point of Czech foreign policy, very like put aside. There was some help sent to Macedonia, which is not Eastern Partnership, but I don't remember that there would anybody talk about some specific help to the countries of Eastern Partnership.
I'm asking. I started with you because the Czech Republic is formally, the Czech diplomacy is now coordinating the Visegrad group this year. So they organized the video conference with Eastern Partnership.
I know, but I think it was very formal because this Eastern Partnership conference was the kind of a peak of that fear that we should somehow defend ourselves. So there was simply no broader interest in this issue. And when we started to help the allies, it was like sending masks to Spain or Italy or North Macedonia, but not to the east. So in this practical
Although, if I may add, as we are discussing now, also the foreign ministers of the EU27 are having their Foreign Affairs Council as a video conference, and one of the main topics on the agenda is Ukraine and assistance to Eastern Partnership countries. And it was announced, I think, this morning that EU will reallocate a huge sum of 850 million euros just to 6 countries of Eastern Partnership, which I think was also supported by all countries of Central Eastern Europe. But over to András to address Szabolcs's question.
And a number of others as well. To Richard's question, from Hungary's perspective, Budapest has been assisting North Macedonia, also Serbia, a number of other countries in the Western Balkans with medical equipment, taking into account the huge numbers of medical equipment already stockpiled in Budapest. Technically, it would be possible to provide some of these equipment to Eastern Partnership countries as well. So capability-wise, the possibility is there. About the political will, I don't know. Actually, Azerbaijan helped Hungary with some symbolic 10,000 masks or something like this. So Budapest, more as a political statement, but actually received some help from one of the Eastern Partnership countries. The Szabolcs question about China and the 5G and the position of as a vendor in the future. I do not see Chinese mask diplomacy as a factor of institutional change. So negotiation formats will not change, frameworks will not change. However, when we move out of the institutional framework and we move to the informal fields of policy, indeed, it would be perfectly logical from China's side to use the mask diplomacy and the coronavirus help as an additional argument intended to improve Beijing's position on the European market. So institutionally, no change. Non-institutionally, I think definitely yes.
Adam, 5G and other issues are big in Poland. Poland is the largest market of all the 4 countries. Has China's perception of China and China's position in Poland changed? as a matter of as a result of mass diplomacy? And
I don't think so. That there is a long-term change going on actually, and I don't think that it will have any effect on 5G. Because Poland is very close allies with the United States, and the United States, of course, has a stake in this process. So this one will not change by the mass diplomacy. And I also, what I think is a very important factor, which we have to remember, is that the Polish expert community is very critical towards China. It's immune, actually, towards Chinese propaganda efforts. And it's, of course, it's very influential in things like that. So I think there won't be a systematic change when it comes to 5G in Poland.
And to Jana Kobzova.
Just a quick one. I mean, as I said, China was the early winner. I'm not sure that's going to change something fundamentally. Slovakia has, in terms of foreign direct investment in China, been the poor member of the V4. We have received almost none. So it's a very different situation than in Hungary or in Czech Republic. And this government specifically is quite conscious about the whole debate about the security of 5G networks. So despite the public relations win, I don't see this being transformed in any kind of substantial, profound attitude of Slovakia towards China.
There is a question in the chat, in a group chat from Natalie Nugaet. Natalie, do you want to ask it yourself or shall I read it? Okay, you are now.
Can you hear me?
Muted.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hi, thanks for doing this. It's great to see a few friends and great to be in contact with everybody. I guess my question, and I'm sorry I came into the conversation after it had started, so I apologize if this is something that you raised in the early first 15 minutes or so. But I wanted to get your sense at this moment, in this incredible moment of uncertainty and change, and basically everything seems up in the air in Europe. What you would say at this point in 2020, at this moment in our crazy times, about the you know, this debate that we've been hearing about for years earlier about the East-West divide in Europe. Would you say that this is a moment where that divide actually doesn't really seem so stark and perhaps fades? And I'm talking not just about government positions, but just the sort of general atmosphere, the way public opinion sees its own country in relation to the rest of the continent. It's more of an atmospherics question that I wanted to put to you. Thanks.
And please introduce yourself. I forgot to ask you.
Sorry, I'm right now. I'm on a Bosch Foundation fellowship based in Berlin, but I now find myself in lockdown Paris, and I'm with the Guardian, but I'm on a break doing a fellowship about Europe and information. Thanks.
Very good. Let me add a question to András, Adam, and Martin about whether tomorrow's EU summit is on the spot in the media or in the political discussion. It is here in Germany. It is seen as a make it or break it summit on rescue measures and fiscal solidarity. So talking about East-West divide, is there a divide on what matters now and where is political attention? András?
Well, I just checked the government's official website about tomorrow's EU summit, and so did the main pro-government newspapers. The only information is that Minister of Justice Judith Varga has attended the video conference of the General Affairs Council, but no information at all on tomorrow's summit. Nothing at all. So this is not much of the public debate.
Adam, do you think Europe will, in terms of East-West divide, that we are moving apart or not?
I don't know. I think it stays the same actually. So well, the East-West divide is mostly fueled by Hungary and Poland, flaw and threatening democracy and so on. So this will remain the same. This will not change because of the COVID crisis. And talking about the tomorrow summit, well, Poland has very low expectations towards what is going to happen. So it's not a huge topic in the media. Poland being not part of the Eurozone is kind of, well, doomed to accept whatever the Eurozone accepts actually. It's actually only interested in kind of ensuring that that countries outside of the Eurozone will have access to support mechanisms, and that the next MFF will not change in a manner that would kind of discriminate Eastern Europeans or Central Europeans. But there is very little attention paid to what is actually happening, and to the whole debate around Euro bonds or Corona bonds, very little attention.
Let's move to Prague. Martin, over to you.
I would totally agree with both my predecessors that almost no discussion and waiting for the Eurozone decision, because we are not the Eurozone member, but we are dependent economically on the Eurozone. Only to add that for a couple of weeks already, when the Eurozone started to discuss its own response, the usual suspects who are proposing the Czech membership in the Eurozone are repeating that now we would be in much better situation than as a non-member. So that's the only thing. So I would say no expectations.
Well, and let's close this round with Jana Kobzova, speaking from the Eurozone country of Slovakia.
I actually want to comment on Natalie's question about the divides. Natalie, I think it depends on what angle you take. If it comes to rule of law, I do think that the divide is going to deepen because of what's happening. My question is whether the economy...
Between East and West, or also within the East?
Both, I think. Both, and it depends on how the governments in Prague and Bratislava will choose to react, or positioned, not maybe react, but in practical terms, how they engage with these countries. But I do think that the perception when it comes to rule of law, that the East is a problem, is unfortunately going to be perpetuated and deepened by what happened. That's just my personal opinion.
There is a follow-up question to this. Sorry to jump in, Jana. There is a follow-up question in chat from Zsuzsa Szelényi about the position of the new Slovak government. If I may twist it also on the rule of law issues and neighbors in Visegrad. Is there? I know that they addressed this in their program manifesto.
They addressed it in the program manifesto, and the ministry is supportive of the declaration of the originally 13 Western European countries who voiced their concerns about rule of law. I personally think the way that declaration has been handled has not been super helpful, because they only the countries in Eastern and Central Europe were not approached to join at the stage of drafting. So just a short answer, yes, I do think that when it comes to rule of law, that divide is going to deepen. But I do think that the discussion, the economic discussion, how do we grow out of this crisis, will bring to the fore the debate between the South and the North. And I think in terms of overall EU architecture, that debate and that divide might become more salient and more vocal at the moment.
We will have to close soon, so let's go for quick reactions, if you have, among speakers. What is actually if András, I think you wanted to say something, or shall I move on with another question?
Let's move on, please.
Given this huge divide between North and South, or Spain and Italy, that really needs to help of others to borrow on the markets to fight the pandemics and their high costs, and the solidarity of the EU, also fiscal solidarity. This is a huge day for the EU and for the future tomorrow. What actually is the interest of Poland and Hungary, let's say, or Czech Republic as non-Eurozone countries? You touched it, but can you elaborate? Will there be only a bystanders, or do they have some interest or stake to play tomorrow? Now, give me your opinion, not only what is the government saying, please.
Okay, I can try. I mean, the interest is very, very clear, and the interest has been clearly connected to the upcoming multi-annual financial framework. So Budapest, just like any other country, has been focused on maximizing the benefits it's going to get from the next MFF. This is the most important and underlining strategic objective. And one needs to add another strategic objective, any kind of rule of law mechanism connected to EU support. This is something that is strongly opposed by the Hungarian government. How the public has been thinking about it, unfortunately, we have no data on that. But from the government's perspective, this, so to keep up the benefits from the next MFF and to avoid any possible rule of law related constraints or decrease of financial support, these are the two key strategic objectives as I see it.
So this was perspective from Budapest by András, Rácz, Martin L. in Prague. Can you chip in?
Yes, I would say that we have a similarity in MFF position, that the Czech government would try to move as many non-conditioned money as possible. Plus, there will be also, I guess, the push to ease the Green Deal and to use or to adjust the Green Deal things towards the support of the economy as such. So I think that it's like continuing topic in this government, especially Prime Minister's plans not to undermine the position of the Czech economy, which is based less on renewables and green energy. So I think this will be kind of a big topic for the Czech government.
Adam, Poland was quite active and its Minister of Finance in the run-up to the European Summit, trying to shape some elements in the discussion about the rescue mechanism and the new sources of money for EU budget. Finance Minister gave interview to Financial Times with some interesting ideas. Can you comment on that?
Well, yes, because Poland, I totally agree with other speakers when it comes to the Central European, I would say, Friends of Cohesion point of view when it comes to the summit. There's also one very important thing. Stability of the Eurozone is a huge concern for Poland because these are basically the business partners of the country. But on the other hand, Poland doesn't want them to move too far ahead. So two-speed Europe would be not a scenario ideal for Poland, even though it would save the Eurozone to some extent. This is a huge save for Poland. That is why Prime Minister Morawiecki said that the European Union has appropriate instruments to fight the economic crisis and no other instruments are needed. There are additional resources needed for example, to tackle the crisis, for example, which could be obtained from fighting against tax havens, for example. But Poland is not a huge fan of new instruments, but of new resources. Yes, of course it is.
Janka, to close with you, there are commentaries in European press that tomorrow this will be a moment of truth for the European Union. That if the leaders will not find an agreement how to help Spain, Italy, others that really need a more fiscal solidarity and support, the EU can even break up. This crisis has much higher sort of pace than the one, the financial crisis 10 years ago. Do you really think it's a moment of truth? And what is the commentariat in Slovakia saying on this, being it a Eurozone country?
Well, I'm not sure this is how it's seen. I mean, it's really the reaction is going to be spread over a couple of months and weeks. And tomorrow's discussion and summit is just one milestone on that discussion. But Mila, I want to pick up on what you said in the beginning. You know, Italy and Spain will have to borrow. Well, the truth is we will all have to borrow. That's the question. You know, how do we finance our debt? And of course, in that case, how long can you keep Eurozone sustainable and fiscally strong if you have such a huge difference in spreads? So, and that's not going to be solved tomorrow, but that's ultimately the question that is going to be with the Eurozone and ultimately with the EU as well for the next couple of months. I don't believe this is going to be answered tomorrow, but I do think that that question is not going to go away.
Very good. Thank you very much to Jana Kobzova, Martin L., Adam Traczyk, and András Rácz, who were our speakers today. Thank you for all of you for your time. And I apologize for those who couldn't ask your questions or who posted something in the chat and I did not bring it in. We will address some of these issues in the coming weeks. Please mark your calendar for 6th of May. We will have a discussion on Russia, and stay healthy. Goodbye for our next discussions.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.